the quiet before the storm. The screen of your phone is still warm from the friction of your thumb, a small rectangle of glass pulsing with blue-white light. You had meant to keep scrolling. One more reel, one more headline, one more dopamine pellet, but something in the cadence of the first line snagged you. Stop scrolling right now. 4 ordinary words, arranged with the urgency of a fire alarm. The algorithmic river keeps flowing above and below the sentence, yet your finger hovers, paralyzed. A hush falls across the room, even though the air conditioning hums on. You feel the brief, disorienting tilt of a world about to pivot on its axis. In that suspended second, the pixels seem to deepen, as though the words have discovered a third dimension. You do not yet know that the next 13 minutes will etch themselves into the soft tissue of your memory, like acid on copper plate, but you sense the approach of something irrevocable. Your pulse quickens, the small bones in your wrist flicker. You have crossed an invisible threshold, and there is no reverse gear. I find. The doctrine of the unwiring. 5 years ago, the man who will narrate this tale stumbled upon an idea older than the printing press, and twice as dangerous. He does not claim to have excavated it, rather it found him, the way certain viruses lie dormant in the blood for decades, until the precise combination of stress and circumstance wakes them. The idea is simple enough to fit on a napkin, yet so corrosive that every friendship he had ever taken for granted began to hiss and bubble like metal dropped in acid. It is not a theory about economics or politics or religion. It is a theory about why your college roommate stopped liking your Instagram posts the week you closed the seed round. It is a theory about why your mother praised your cooking just before asking you to co-sign a loan. It is a theory about why the partner who once brought you tea in bed now times their tenderness to coincide with their need for reassurance. The theory is 5 centuries old, first inked in the marginalia of a Florentine exile, yet it is as current as the last notification that lit your phone. The man calls it, with no trace of theater, the real motivation matrix. You are about to be handed the skeleton key to every living heart, yours included. The key is made of a metal that heats up the longer you hold it. Euphoria prologue in the language of omen. Before the story proper begins, the narrator insists on a ritual warning, the kind shamans chant before guiding you across thin ice. Once you see these patterns, he says, you cannot unsee them. The statement is neither metaphor nor melodrama, it is physics. Neurons that fire together, wire together, and the synaptic constellation that will form in the next quarter hour will remain luminous long after the screen goes dark. You will carry it into grocery store lines and parent-teacher conferences. You will glimpse it between the lines of wedding vows and eulogies. You will taste it in the sweetness of favors offered without preamble. And yes, you will flinch from it when you catch your own reflection, practicing kindness in the bathroom mirror. Some viewers, he admits, will shut the video halfway through and spend the rest of the week binge-watching comfort sitcoms to sandbag the flood of insight. Others will finish the video and still pretend they have not understood. A minority, smaller than the creator of this tale would like, will let the knowledge settle into their marrow and discover that the world has not become colder, it has simply become legible. The choice, he insists, is still yours, but the window is closing. The reel is already spinning. IV. The office. As laboratory. Let us step back then to a morning 6 years ago before the Matrix had a name. The narrator, call him Elias, was 28, occupying a narrow desk beneath a skylight that leaked ambition and fluorescent light in equal measure. The startup smelled of single-origin coffee and unearned confidence. Elias had been hired to optimize user retention, which meant he spent his days translating human hesitation into bar graphs. Across the open-plan expanse sat David, the platonic ideal of a co-worker, helpful without being cloying, funny without demanding the spotlight, the sort of person who remembered how you took your coffee and once drove a junior developer to the emergency room at 2 a.m. David's calendar was a public good. His praise was lavish but never fulsome. When the quarterly awards were handed out, David applauded loudest for the winner, even though everyone knew he had logged more commits than the rest of the team combined. Elias admired him the way one admires a mountain lake, without the faintest suspicion that the lake might be thinking about him too. The promotion. That wasn't a promotion. Then came the org chart earthquake. The founders, desperate to scale, promoted David to engineering manager. Within 14 days, the lake froze over. David's jokes took on a brittle edge. He stopped volunteering to review pull requests from former peers, delegating that labor to interns whose names he barely knew. During stand-up, he now sat at the head of the table, laptop angled like a shield. When Elias dropped by his new glass-walled office to ask for guidance, David listened with the impatience of a man hearing a voicemail at double speed. The warmth was gone, or rather, it had been rerouted. Elias felt the sting of personal betrayal, that childlike astonishment when a playmate suddenly pretends not to know you on the first day of middle school. He replayed every instance of David's earlier kindness and felt the floor tilt under the accumulated weight of doubt. Why? The book that whispered back. That weekend, in a fit of masochistic curiosity, Elias downloaded a public domain translation of Niccolò Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy, not the Prince, that slender handbook for aspiring tyrants, but the longer, messier meditation on republics and the people who inevitably chew them to pulp. He expected dense Renaissance prose. Instead, he found a voice that spoke across 500 years with unnerving clarity. Machiavelli did not moralize. He anatomized. He described citizens who praised liberty while angling for sinecures, allies who swore eternal fealty while measuring the angle of the knife. Every page seemed to hum with subtext, a second text written in invisible ink that only appeared when held up to the heat of suspicion. Elias began to annotate furiously, color-coding margins until the PDF looked like a stained glass window. Somewhere around chapter 12, a sentence detonated behind his eyes. Men are more careful in keeping their possessions than in acquiring them, and when they believe they are loved, they relax their vigilance, which is the reason for their ruin. He read it once, twice, a third time, each repetition loosening a new tooth of certainty. David had not mutated into a worse version of himself. The scaffolding of incentives had simply shifted, revealing the architecture that had been present all along. Visek, the 6-month experiment. Elias decided, with the grim resolve of a scientist injecting himself with a prototype vaccine, to test Machiavelli's premise on the living tissue of his own life. For 6 months he would observe every human interaction as if it were a scene in an invisible courtroom. He equipped himself with a pocket notebook whose cover read, in ironic block letters, "Assume good intent." Inside, however, he catalogued what he called the real gain: coffee bought for a colleague, real gain, social credit, future favor, compliment paid to a barista, real gain, mood elevation, status display, text to ex-girlfriend just checking in, real gain, assuage guilt, reopen option. The exercise felt obscene at first, like translating lullabies into spreadsheets. Yet the more data he gathered, the more the chaos began to sort itself into repeating motifs. Every gift, every sacrifice, every ostensibly selfless act resolved into a 3-tiered structure. The story, what the actor claimed; the strategy, what the actor accomplished; and the survival, the ancient hunger being fed. He began to think of human behavior as origami, elaborate folds that conceal but never obliterate, the original square of self-interest. The AT. The girlfriend who cried authenticity. The first major test arrived in the shape of his then-girlfriend, Mara, a landscape architect whose laughter could reverse gravity. They had been living together for 11 months in a loft that smelled of eucalyptus and shared playlists. One Thursday evening, she returned from work flushed with triumph. Her firm had won a bid to redesign the riverfront. Elias uncorked a bottle of cava and toasted her brilliance. She deflected, eyes shining, insisting the win belonged to the whole team. Later, as they drifted toward sleep, she murmured, "I'm just lucky to work with people who believe in me." Elias felt the matrix click into place. Story: humble gratitude. Strategy: maintain likability while ascending. Survival: need for both achievement and social acceptance. He lay awake tracing patterns on the ceiling, wondering if the woman breathing beside him was, at that very moment, executing an unconscious subroutine. The thought did not make him love her less. It made the love more porous, shot through with a kind of cosmic pity. He realized he was no longer jealous of her success. He was jealous of the simplicity with which she could still pretend it was only luck. IX. The parental equation. The second test materialized during Sunday dinner at his parents' house, a suburban ranch frozen in the amber of 1997 decor. His mother had prepared his childhood favorite, chicken paprikash, and the scent dredged up memories of scraped knees and unconditional applause. Mid-meal, his father cleared his throat and asked, with studied casualness, whether Elias might look over a new investment proposal. The ask felt light as meringue, but Elias heard the tremor beneath it. Story: father seeking son's expert opinion. Strategy: outsource due diligence to trusted insider. Survival: preserve nest egg, maintain patriarchal role as provider. Elias felt the matrix hum like a tuning fork. He agreed, of course. How could he not? But the yes tasted different now, alloyed with the knowledge that even the primal bond of parent and child is mediated by a ledger of emotional bookkeeping. He watched his mother ladle seconds onto his plate and wondered what currency she hoped to accrue: gratitude, future caretaking, the postponed fear of abandonment dressed up as nurturing. X. The charitable impulse. Determined to falsify the hypothesis, Elias sought out the most selfless arena he could think of, a Saturday morning soup kitchen in the basement of a church whose stained glass saints looked emaciated from centuries of bad theology. He donned latex gloves and ladled minestrone into styrofoam bowls while volunteers sang off-key hymns. Across from him, an elderly woman named Dolores insisted on calling everyone Mijo or Mija and told stories about her late husband's devotion. Between refills, Elias asked why she came every week. She replied, without hesitation, that giving back was what God expected. Yet her eyes flicked, almost involuntarily, toward the pastor jotting names in a ledger. Story: obedience to divine command. Strategy: secure place in heavenly ledger and earthly community. Survival: need for purpose, continuity, recognition. Elias felt a pang of disappointment that tasted like sacrilege. He had wanted Dolores to be the exception that cracked the theory wide open. Instead, she was further proof, a saint who had merely relocated her need to matter. XI. The matrix revealed. By the end of the 6 months, Elias possessed a notebook swollen with evidence and a heart that felt simultaneously heavier and lighter. He distilled the data into 3 concentric circles, a kind of secular trinity. Level 1. The story, the public script, often sincerely believed by the actor. Level 2. The strategy, the situational objective being optimized. Level 3. The survival, the primordial need scratching at the door: security, status, connection, autonomy, purpose. He discovered that the more noble the story sounded, the more lethal the strategy tended to be, precisely because the actor had convinced themselves of their own altruism. The parent who claims to sacrifice everything for the child is often feeding an identity of indispensability. The activist who live streams every act of generosity is mining status with the fervor of a prospector. The lover who declares, "I just want you to be happy," is often bargaining for the continuation of their own happiness. None of this made the actions worthless. It simply revealed the hidden wiring beneath the marble skin of virtue. 3 portraits in motion. To inoculate his future self against nostalgia, Elias sketched 3 archetypes that kept recurring in his field notes. First, the overly helpful friend, whose calendar is a lattice of favors. Story: I just like being there for people. Strategy: become the emotional linchpin no one dare discard. Survival: terror of abandonment, coupled with a hunger to feel essential. Watch, Elias wrote, how this friend engineers crises that only they can solve, how they wilt when you decline assistance, how they catalogue debts you never agreed to incur. Second, the modest high achiever who accepts awards with the disclaimer, "I was just lucky." Story: humility as moral reflex. Strategy: maximize likability while hoarding status. Survival: need to belong to the tribe even while rising above it. Their modesty is a moat, disguised as a bridge. Third, the brutally honest person, weaponizer of candor. Story: I value truth over tact. Strategy: establish dominance, avoid the labor of diplomacy. Survival: fear of vulnerability, need to feel superior. Their honesty is almost never self-directed, and when it is, it arrives pre-packaged with self-forgiveness. The mirror cracks. The most disorienting discovery came the day Elias turned the matrix on himself. He chose a random Tuesday and reversed the lens. Why had he texted his college roommate, "Congratulations on her engagement"? Real gain, social credit, relief from guilt about not staying in touch, reassurance that he too was on track. Why had he offered to help his neighbor assemble an IKEA dresser? Real gain, escape from his own spiraling thoughts, chance to be seen as handy preemptive insurance against future noise complaints. Each admission felt like peeling sunburned skin, equal parts pain and satisfaction. The horror was not that he was selfish. The horror was how sophisticated his rational machinery had become at disguising the selfishness as civic virtue. He remembered a line from a poem he had once pretended to understand. "We are the mirrors we refuse to look into." Now the mirror had become a microscope. 40. The ethics of seeing. A lesser mind might have used the matrix as a cudgel, a way to weaponize insight for seduction or profit. Elias, perhaps because he had begun as an idealist, felt a solemn responsibility bloom in the cavity left by naivete. He drafted a set of guidelines on the inside cover of the notebook. Never reveal the matrix to someone who has not asked. Use insight to protect, not exploit. Meet people at the level of their actual need, not their stated desire. Forgive yourself daily for the same trespasses you forgive in others. He underlined the last rule 3 times, as though the pen itself might enforce humility. XV. The return of the repressed. 1 month later, Elias attended the office holiday party, a fluorescent bacchanal catered by a taco truck that had seen better decades. David, now fully ensconced in his managerial persona, circulated with the calculated warmth of a game show host. When their paths crossed near the guacamole, David clapped Elias on the shoulder and said, "You've been quiet lately. Everything good?" Elias felt the old reflex to reassure, to offer the story of benign busyness. Instead, he heard himself say, "I've been thinking about why we do what we do." David's smile froze for half a second, then rebooted. "Deep thoughts at Christmas," he laughed. already scanning the room for higher value interactions. In that flicker, Elias saw the strategy naked. David needed to be seen caring about former peers without investing real time. The revelation did not embitter him. It liberated him. He could choose to play his part in the pantomime or excuse himself to the balcony. He chose the balcony, where the December air tasted like a new kind of freedom. Exis mai. The conversation with Mara. The relationship with Mara did not survive the winter. They parted on a Sunday evening, dishes unwashed in the sink, an Adele song leaking from the neighbor's apartment like a parody of heartbreak. Mara accused him of becoming distant, analytical, like you're studying me instead of living with me. He could have explained the matrix, could have argued that understanding need not preclude tenderness. Instead, he listened to the accusation and recognized the truth inside it. He had become a scientist in the laboratory of intimacy, and she had signed up to be a lover, not a specimen. When she left, carrying a box of succulents and unresolved grievances, Elias felt the ache of genuine loss, yet even the ache mapped cleanly onto the grid. Story: I miss her. Strategy: preserve the narrative that I am capable of love. Survival: avoid loneliness, maintain identity as partner. The matrix did not dissolve grief. It revealed grief's architecture, which somehow made the pain more bearable. XV. The quiet revolution. Months slid by. Elias left the startup, cashed out his modest equity, and moved to a smaller city where the river still smelled like river. He began teaching night classes on negotiation at the community college, reframing the curriculum around the matrix. Students arrived expecting tips on mirroring body language and anchoring high. They left with an existential hangover. Some dropped the class. Others returned with stories: the daughter who understood why her father hoarded money, the salesman who stopped resenting clients who lied. Elias never claimed to be a guru. He simply offered a flashlight and pointed toward the basement of the human heart. XV8. The warning expanded. Now, dear reader, or watcher, or listener, however you came to absorb this tale, comes the moment Elias insists on a second warning, louder than the first. The Matrix is not a party trick. It is not a password to an elite subreddit. It is a slow-acting solvent that dissolves the glue holding many illusions together. You will find yourself at birthday parties, observing the choreography of gift-giving, like an anthropologist studying cargo cults. You will overhear lovers quarrel and map the subterranean trade of affection for absolution. You will watch your own reflection apologize and detect the moment the apology becomes a down payment on future forgiveness. This clarity is not comfortable. It is less like stepping into the light and more like stepping into a colder, thinner atmosphere where the lungs burn before they adjust. Some people choose to crawl back down the mountain. Others acclimate and discover that the view, though stark, is spectacular. XIXI. The practice of compassionate detachment. Elias developed a daily ritual. Each morning he wrote down 3 interactions from the previous day and subjected them to the matrix. Then he added a 4th column labeled mercy. In that column he noted the fear behind each strategy: the friend who feared disappearance, the parent who feared irrelevance, the stranger on the bus who feared eye contact because it might demand empathy. He could not spare. Mercy did not erase the truth. It upholstered the truth with tenderness. Over time, the exercise became less forensic and more devotional. He was no longer dissecting motives. He was kneeling beside them. XX. The inheritance. Years later, Elias's father was diagnosed with a slow neurodegenerative disease. The man who once negotiated million-dollar deals began to lose nouns like loose change. During visits, Elias watched his mother perform elaborate pantomimes of normalcy, correcting his father's misremembered stories without ever naming the forgetting. One afternoon, his father clutched Elias's wrist and said, I know I asked too much. The sentence arrived fully formed, as though it had been waiting decades for clearance. Elias felt the matrix flare. Then quiet. Story. Apology. Strategy. Reconcile before the window closes. Survival die feeling loved, not resented. But beneath those layers pulsed something the matrix could not quantify, a father's terror of being remembered as a burden. Elias squeezed the fragile hand and answered, "You gave me more than you ever asked." It was, strictly speaking, untrue, but in the economy of dying men it was the only currency that mattered. XXI. The synthesis. The matrix, Elias eventually realized, was not a weapon of cynicism, but a tool for stewardship. To see the self-interest of others is to stop taking their choices personally. To see one's own self-interest is to stop pretending sainthood. Between those two clarities, a new space opens, neither utopia nor wasteland, where negotiation becomes collaboration and love becomes a conscious act of mutual feeding. He began to think of every relationship as a garden planted atop a fault line. The flowers are real, so is the tectonic drift. Tending the garden does not stop the drift, but naming the drift prevents denial, and denial is what cracks foundations. XX trend. The invitation extended. You who have followed this narrative to its outer rim are now the inheritor of the flashlight. The next conversation you have, whether with a barista, a spouse, a child, or the version of yourself in the bathroom mirror, will present an opportunity. Ask silently, what does this person actually gain? Then ask, with equal curiosity, what fear makes that gain seem essential? Resist the urge to weaponize the answers. Resist equally the urge to despair. Instead, experiment with meeting the real need when you can, and declining when you must, but never again confuse the wrapping paper with the gift. In doing so, you join a quiet fellowship of observers who refuse to mistake theater for reality, yet still buy tickets and applaud loudly when the performance moves them. L3. The epilogue that refuses to end. Somewhere, in a city not unlike yours, Elias is 50 now. His notebook has evolved into a digital garden, encrypted and synced across devices, tended like a bonsai. He still teaches, still writes, still spends Friday evenings on the phone with his mother, who no longer needs to ask for favors because her needs are now transparent to them both. He has learned to ride the earthquake waves of human motive without being thrown. On the wall of his study hangs a postcard of Machiavelli's portrait, the diplomat's mouth curled in what might be amusement or contempt. Elias likes to think it is the smile of a man who saw the machinery and chose to describe it rather than despair. The postcard caption reads, in Elias's handwriting, "We are all strategists. Forgive the strategy. Honor the need." The ink has faded to the color of dried blood. And you, yes, you are already practicing. Perhaps you have paused this text to scroll back and re-examine a memory. The friend who ghosted you after your book deal, the colleague who congratulated you with eyes like winter. The matrix is not a verdict, it is a pair of glasses. The world looks different, neither uglier nor more beautiful, but infinitely more intricate. Wear them long enough, and you forget they are on your nose. The choice always is what you build with the clarity, a fortress of suspicion or a bridge of informed compassion. Both are made of the same stone, only the architecture differs. So walk forward, speak to the next human you meet. Notice the flicker of calculation behind their pupils and love them anyway, not because calculation is noble, but because it is human, and humanity is the only tribe any of us ever truly joins. And when you catch yourself calculating in return, smile at the symmetry. The loop closes, the mirror reflects, and the game continues, now illuminated by a light you can never fully extinguish.